Welcome to this info video on regulatory writing. In this video, I will cover what regulatory writing is, what skills are required, what the job involves. Then I will present my career path as an example on how to transition to regulatory writing. And finally, I will present the group mentoring program starting in September. My name is Katrin Zaragoza Dörr, and as you might guess from the name, I'm of a mixed background. My father is Spanish and my mother's German. I'm based close to Barcelona, and I founded Medrika Consulting, which provides medical writing services as well as mentoring and training regulatory writing. I provide this both to companies as well as private persons. I'm a very active member of the European Medical Writers Association. In case you don't know it, it's an association with over 1,500 members holding twice a year conference. I am the current president of the organization as well as ambassador, which means that I help to promote the medical writing profession in and around Barcelona. I'm also a workshop leader of the organization, and I'm a member of the Regulatory Special Interest Group. I'm also a member of another Spanish medical writing association called ARTEM. So let's see what medical writing is. Medical writing involves communication of clinical and scientific data in a clear and effective manner, and it includes preparation of a wide range of document types in different therapeutic areas. And these therapeutic areas could be oncology, neurology, dermatology, etc. There are two main types of medical writing that differ in their objective and in their target. On one hand, you have regulatory writing, which has the objective to obtain or maintain marketing authorization of a drug, medical device, etc. And their target are health authorities and sometimes also clinical trials personnel and the lay public. Medical communication, on the other hand, has the objective to inform about drugs, medical devices, diseases, etc. And their target are healthcare professionals, such as doctors or nurses, and patients and their families, as well as patient support groups and potentially newspaper reporters. Focusing now on the first type of medical writing, regulatory writing, let's have a look on how regulatory writers support drug approval. So you are probably aware that there are different phases leading to the marketing authorization of a drug. And there are many regulatory documents that are required to receive this marketing authorization, starting with protocols, which describe how a clinical study will be performed. Then you have the clinical study reports, which describe the data of the study. You have briefing documents, which are means for a pharma company to ask questions to the health authorities on their clinical development. So a pharma company can ask questions, for example, to the FDA. Then when the health authorities, for example, the FDA has questions to the pharma company, the company will need to provide response via a response to health authorities document. And this is another document where a writer can be involved. You also have investigators brochure, which is a document required whenever a clinical study is conducted. Then you have pediatric plans, which is another regulatory requirement. And then you have the ECTD, the Electronic Common Technical Document, which is the submission package with all the data based on which the health authority will decide whether to approve your drug or not. Regulatory documents are very important because they are the basis for drug approval by health authorities. Health authorities will review these regulatory documents and decide whether a drug is approved or not, but also earlier they will review, for example, your protocol and decide whether you can conduct actually the clinical study or not. And the content of the regulatory document determines the success of a drug's clinical development. On one hand, of course, the content and the data per se. So is your drug safe? Does it work? But also the way that the data and the content is presented needs to be presented in a clear, focused, and targeted way. Targeted to whom? Well, mostly to the health authorities. The timing of the submission of this document is also important and will determine the speed in which a drug is approved. So if you take very long to write a specific document, the longer you take, the later you will submit the document, and finally this will add up, and the later you will get approval of your drug. So therefore, it is all about quality and speed when writing regulatory documents, and therefore it's not surprising that you have an expert in accomplishing this objective. And the medical writer has actually a huge impact on a drug clinical development, and companies are acknowledging this, and that's why medical writers are increasingly gaining importance. So there were, for example, some documents that's not that many years ago, maybe 3 years ago, were actually not written by medical writers, but by other experts in the pharma company, but nowadays are written by medical writers. Now you might be worried, how will I know what is required to get a drug approved? Well, no worries, you will have a team of experts within the pharma company who knows exactly what is expected. And they will deliver the content for the regulatory document that you will then write. And you can imagine that the coordination of that many stakeholders is complex. And this is where the medical writer jumps in. The medical writer helps to coordinate this feedback and to coordinate all those stakeholders. So let's have a closer look at the role of the regulatory medical writer. So let's start with the skills that a regulatory writer should have. And the first one is the obvious one. You need to have great writing skills. You need to be able to write clear, focused, and message-driven content, be able to present complex information in a clear and crisp way. You also need to have technical skills, understanding the document type you need to write, but also the structure and content requirements and other regulatory requirements. You need to be good at using Word, SharePoint, and other document management systems. You also need to have a great analytical capacity, as you will analyze source documents and synthesize the data, breaking down complex data into smaller understandable bits. You need to identify patterns and trends and inconsistency in the data, and to be able to draw a conclusion based on the data. You also need to have clinical research knowledge. You need to know, this would include knowing about the drug development process, the trial phases, the trial designs, how trials are actually conducted and its stakeholders, having a basic knowledge of statistics, pharmacology, safety and efficacy assessments. And related to this, you need to have regulatory knowledge. Knowledge of the ethical standards and regulatory compliance requirements, also knowing about regulatory pathways and submission types. But luckily for you, you would usually also have at your side an expert in regulatory affairs. So therefore, of course, you need to have a basic understanding of these regulatory requirements. But again, don't worry, you will have somebody who is the real expert there supporting you. Project management is fundamental for a regulatory writer, and it is so important that I will be speaking about this in a dedicated slide. Stakeholder manager is also very important. Remember the previous slide with all those stakeholders that you need to manage. Having a strategic perspective, which means seeing the bigger picture and thinking ahead, is also very important. You need to be able to critically evaluate and also be willing to challenge the content from experts. And this would also include anticipating regulatory questions and concerns, aligning the content of your document with the overall regulatory strategy, recognizing which information is most critical for decision making. And this you will be getting better with experience, of course. the pieces in the puzzle, understanding who the different stakeholders are when you write a document, their responsibilities, understanding also the purpose of your document and its impact on the overall drug approval process is important. You need also to be a problem solver, thinking out of the box to provide solutions, being always ready for change of plans, because believe me, those will always happen. And this, of course, requires a high level of flexibility and resilience. You also need to have a compliance mindset because the clinical research field is strongly regulated, not only content-wise, but also all the process around the development of documents. And finally, you need to have also very good communication skills because you will have to interact with all those experts that we saw in the previous slides, but also with submission teams, with other medical writers, and many other stakeholders. And this communication will happen via emails, via Teams, chat, via calls, and you will need to find the best solution to interact with the different stakeholders because people are different. And there are some people where you just send an email and you will get the information that you need or the action that you need, but then there are others who will ignore you and you need to find the best way how to approach them. So as I just mentioned, project management is fundamental and related to this. The document development process per se is very important, as I will show you. Be aware that for some documents, I actually only spend 10% of my time writing the document and 90% of my time is dedicated to the whole process around this document. And this includes time management. On one hand, establishing realistic timelines and making sure that you're meeting this deadline. Also, the project coordination is part of this. You will be monitoring the progress of the project and organizing the team activities. Stakeholder management is also key in this regard. You need to facilitate communication between the team members and gather information from this cross-functional team. You need also to drive cross-functional alignment and decision making, and this includes managing the review of the document, resolving conflicts, and driving consensus. And finally, multitasking and prioritization is also critical because you usually will not be just writing one document at a time, but will have several documents in parallel. So managing these different documents and competing demands is you need to be skilled at that and recognizing what has the highest priority when. And this is all connected to the skills we reviewed earlier. You need to be a good project manager, a good stakeholder manager, good at communicating, and having a compliance mindset. So summing up, the regulatory writer in a team is a stakeholder manager, a document writing expert, of course, a project manager, and somebody who leads without mandate. And this requires a high level of diplomacy. Because at the end of the day, the regulatory writer shepherds the teams towards a timely and high quality submission and takes ownership in doing so. Moving now to the second part of the session, potential career pathways, I will explain how I reached regulatory writing. When thinking about my professional career, I like to group it into three perspectives based on the knowledge that I've gained. On one hand, there's the molecular medicines view, then the clinical operations view, and the strategies and clinical research view. The first view was gained during my time as a scientist in academia. From the beginning of my studies, I wanted to become a scientist, and I actually was one for 10 years. I worked at different research institutes throughout Europe, changing as I pleased. And I was doing a second postdoc in Barcelona in a very supportive lab, very supportive boss. But it was there where my professional crisis hit me. So the turning point was when I started applying to grants And there were different triggers there. On one hand, coming across a zillion of publications just about one topic, wondering who reads all these publications, why are we producing them? Also not receiving the grants that I applied for. I received very good evaluations of the project and the way that I described that, but at the end of the day, the number and impact of my publications made me fail, and there it hit me that I would always just be worth the sum of my publications. Also realizing that I could not stand anymore pipetting at the bench, and actually that I liked writing. And now you might think, oh, that's where she realized that she wanted to become a medical writer. Well, no, because I did not know that the profession existed, and I was living in my science bubble, and I had no ideas of alternatives to science. So I decided to leave academia and started looking for alternatives within the pharma sector. This was in the middle of the Spanish economic crisis and therefore challenging, also because I did not know anything about the pharma industry and I actually did not have a network there. There were some job offers that were attractive to me because they included scientific discussions with physicians, but I also realized at some point that it would be very challenging getting one of those roles coming directly from academia. There was a high demand back then of clinical research associates, CRA, and there was also master's studies, including an unpaid traineeship to get a training to become a CRA. And I realized that this was probably the easiest entry door into the pharma sector, and that I could later on move to a more scientifically stimulating role. So I decided to jump into the cold water, enroll into this postgraduate program, and leaving academia behind. So let me explain what a CRA is, first by having a closer look how clinical trials are conducted. Most studies are conducted at hospitals where nurses and physicians visit the patient participating in the study, doing a number of assessments and tests as described in the study protocol. The data they collect need to reach the pharma company to evaluate whether their drug is safe and works. And you need to keep in mind that the data in the hospital contains sensitive data from the patient and with the name of the patient, address, etc. And it needs to reach the pharma company in an anonymized way. How is this achieved? Basically, the hospital personnel enters the data in an anonymized way within a database called a case report form, which is then reviewed and accessed by the pharma company. And like this, nobody outside the hospital will know from whom the tests and assessments are. And here is where the CRA comes in. The CRA travels to the hospital, speaks with the study personnel, checks the medical records of the patients, and whether the data have been entered correctly in the database. A CRA also checks whether the protocol and any regulation has been followed, and especially whether the safety and the rights of the patients have been granted. So I worked as a CRA for a couple of years, after which I had the opportunity to start working in medical writing, which was the scientific stimulating environment I was really looking for. So I started as a medical writer first in a non-profit organization and later in a pharma company. And actually, my first job, I did not know I was a medical writer, nor did I know what the profession involved. I did not learn that until I started my second employment in medical writing. And during this early career, I also learned that in Spain it is very easy to be made redundant, even if you have a permanent position. So this is what pushed me to try freelancing, and I loved it. I was freelance for a couple of years, working for CROs and agencies mostly, but the final clients were always pharma and biotech companies. And one of my clients offered me an employment that I could not say no to. And that's why I started working as an employee again for Merck with the global headquarters in Germany. But after some time, although the job was great, the team were great, I realized that I was born to be a freelancer. So I started freelancing again in September 2023, and shortly after that founded Medrika Consulting. So how has my journey helped me to become who I am and to gain all those skills that a regulatory writer needs and that I have? On one hand, my time as a crazy scientist helped me to improve my analytical capacity, my attention to detail, my scientific writing skills, but also presentation skills in general, my resilience. So anybody who has done a PhD knows what level of resilience you need for that. It has also helped me to have an ongoing learning mindset and to work independently and well organized. Then, as a CRA, I learned everything about clinical trial setup. I gained a great overview of the pharma industry. I learned about clinical trial documentation, including the protocol. It was a great training of my psychological skills and my teamwork capacity. It also showed me to be absolutely flexible, working under tremendous pressure. And of course, I learned a lot about regulatory requirements. And then finally, in my last stage of my career as a medical writer, I improved my medical writing skills, including writing specifically for health authorities, which has a bit a different language. I learned also a lot about clinical development strategies, to lead teams as a project manager, and I was able to integrate my clinical operation view within the job as a regulatory writer. So it helps me a lot when I'm writing protocols, for example, the fact that I've been a CRA. And during this time, I also learned to never say never, because I never thought that I would become a freelancer. And and also not that I would go back to employment. So let me now present the Bridge to Pharma Group mentoring program. My goal when designing mentoring programs is to convey all the information that you need to become a valued regulatory writer. I provide theoretic training, but I also transmit any piece of knowledge based on what I've learned on the job by seeing great regulatory writers in action and horrible writers in action. Knowing what the team in a pharma company needs and how you can go beyond based on the service provider perspective and the client perspective that I have. And being very aware that a regulatory writer can impact the outcome of a drug's development program. The program sets the foundation, assuming that you don't have any prior pharma experience. But still, I will be teaching you things that some already established regulatory writers don't know. The mentoring lasts 8 weeks, each week dedicated to a topic, and it is built on 4 pillars. First pillar are self-paced preparation materials, mostly webinars about the topic of the week, followed by a knowledge test. Then there are the group sessions during which we will discuss any questions about the topic of the week in a group of maximum 10 students. And this is also a great opportunity to network and connect with other peers. Then on selected weeks, you will have homework, and you will have 3 individual mentoring sessions with me. The total time dedication is approximately 38 hours, and be aware that most of the homework and all individual sessions can be booked beyond the 8-week period. So in case you don't have that much time during these 8 weeks, you can shift this outside this time frame. Each week we will be covering one topic, starting with careers in medical writing, then clinical research and regulatory framework, the pharma world, an overview of regulatory writing documents, the regulatory document development process. I will also show you how to market yourself via your CV and LinkedIn, Then we will review the functional experts in clinical development, which are all those experts that you will interact with when you write a regulatory document. And finally, I will help you to prepare for an interview, or if you're a freelancer, with meeting with the clients. So basically, I will let you know what employers and clients want, that you really can carefully prepare for those meetings. The preparation materials are to be reviewed before each group sessions, and they are mostly videos which I have prepared, during which I go through a specific topic, the topic of the week. So think of it as a recorded webinar. There are also a few reading materials, although those are really the minority. You can have a look at the program to see a balance between the videos and reading materials. And your time dedication to go through these materials is usually between 1 to 2 hours per week. And once you have watched those preparation materials, you will complete a knowledge check in form of a quiz. Each week there will be a group session, each dedicated to the topic of the week. Here are the dates of the sessions, but your work would actually start a week earlier when I release the preparation material. So you have 1 week to go through this preparation material. You write down any questions that you have, and then during the session, you can ask any questions that you have, and also follow-up topics, follow-up questions. And those sessions are 1 hour of duration, with the exception of these two here, regulatory document development process and functional experts in clinical development. Those have a workshop format and are 3 hours of duration. So this here, basically, I will go through the content in a workshop format, and then we will have some quizzes. We will also have group exercises. There will also be a simulation of a kickoff meeting. And I selected these 2 topics because they are key for you to become a great project manager and stakeholder manager during the document development process. And I actually delivered this workshop also to more experienced medical writer who found it really useful. And since this applies to any regulatory document that you write, there is a high value of this workshop. And finally, be aware that on the 17th of September, we will have a welcome session. And this session is intended to get to know each other, that you get to know your peers, so that then we know each other when we start in September 24, and we can just directly deep dive into the theory. On selected weeks, you will get homework. On one hand, for example, preparing for a job interview or a client meeting, depending whether you're looking for an employment or a freelance project. Another homework that you will need to complete is to prepare a kickoff meeting. And a kickoff meeting is something that you will conduct whenever you start writing a regulatory document. So this is something you will be doing throughout your career. And the total time dedication for the homework, all the homework that you need to complete, is 11 hours. The program also includes 3 individual mentoring sessions with me intended to accelerate your career. The first session, Towards a Career Medical Writer, is intended to review your path so far, your goals, and identify any gaps. In the second session, we will be discussing your CV and LinkedIn profile. So based on the webinars and on what you've learned also in the group session, you will update your CV and your LinkedIn profile to make it a pharma industry directed. You will then update this, send it to me. I will review it before the session, and during the session, I will provide you with feedback and will provide you any suggestion. And finally, you will have a third session where we will simulate either a job interview or a meeting with a client, depending on whether you are interested in getting employment or a freelance project. So again, here you will prepare in advance for this interview or for this meeting, and we will then simulate this. So I will pretend that I am your potential employer or your potential client. And each of the sessions is of 45 minutes of duration. You can have a look at the program for more details, but let me just provide you an example on how the first 2 weeks would look like. The week one topic is careers in medical writing, and it includes 75 minutes of webinars and an optional reading, which will be released September 17th. After watching the webinars and reading the materials, you complete the knowledge check. And the group session of this week will take place on September 24th. That same day, I will release the materials of the next topic, which is clinical research and regulatory framework. In this case, those are webinars of 120 minutes of duration. Once you've watched them, you complete the knowledge check, and then we will meet again on October 1st. And week 2 includes also homework, which you will have time to complete until end of November, which is to acquire your GCP certificate. And this GCP certificate you will obtain through an external provider, and it is a very important addition for your CV. So what are the goals of the program? As I mentioned earlier, I want to set the foundation for you to become an excellent medical writer. And this would include gaining clinical research knowledge as well as regulatory knowledge, that you understand the pieces in the puzzle, that you start preparing your compliance mindset, that you're fully aware on what you need to be careful with. Also, that you improve your project management abilities as well as your stakeholder management abilities, that you start gaining strategic perspective, to give you tips to be a good problem solver, as well as tips to improve your communication capacities. And I have designed this program with intention to transmit everything that I've learned since joining the pharma industry, all those things that I completely ignored when I was in academia. And most of this knowledge I actually gained on the job. So in case you go then to an interview, you can be confident of knowing a lot of things despite never having been a medical writer. The program is directed to starters without clinical research experience, but it goes beyond just starter levels, as I will show you how to avoid errors that some regulatory writers do and to make you understand what you need to do to excel. How will this mentoring prepare you for your future career? So, of course, in addition to everything that you will learn during these 8 weeks, you will have a CV adapted to the industry requirements. You will be prepared for an interview for an entry level or for a meeting with the client. And yeah, basically all those 8 weeks of training will give you insight into the real job challenges so that your potential employer does not need to start from scratch to onboard you. So this is something important that you will then need to transmit during an interview, all that you have learned, that you know what an SOP is, the importance of compliance and how to meet it, how to lead a document writing process, how to lead a kickoff meeting, where to find regulatory guidelines, what the expectations of your role are, who are the different stakeholders. And finally, if this is not enough, I could assist your future employer by providing in-house mentoring to support your onboarding. Since we are setting the ground during these 8 weeks, we will not have time to deep dive into any specific document, but you will have the basis to build on, either by enrolling on some MWA workshop or by enrolling to my other group mentoring program, the Trial Writer, which builds on the bridge to pharma. And setting this basis before actually deep diving into each of the document types is fundamental, because believe me, there are many active regulatory writers who are not delivering what the client or the employer needs. And at the end of the program, you will know what the client and employer needs And this will help you to secure a project as a freelancer or a job as an employee. And just to conclude, and related to the program goals, there are basically two different modus operandi how to be a regulatory writer. You can be a passive medical writer focused just on writing the document, or an active medical writer who is a project manager, who leads without mandate, and everything that I've told you before. And why is it so important that you become an active medical writer? Well, first, remember what I mentioned earlier, that with some documents, I actually just spend 10% of my time actually writing the document, and 90% is dedicated to the process around that. And there is also something very important to keep in mind. That is, of course, the presence of AI, which can replace the writing part to some extent. But the project management aspect, the managing the stakeholder aspect, this is something that AI will not be able to replace. So it means that it is very important that you embrace the idea of being an active medical writer, because this is the part that will secure your job. And with this, we reach the end of this video. Just to sum up, some key information about the Bridge to Pharma program. The group mentoring part has a duration of 8 weeks, starting September 17th, the first session being on September the 24th. The homework individual sessions are likely to extend beyond that time. We will be a small group of maximum 10 students. If you are interested in enrolling, I leave you here the QR code. Remember, the registration closes September the 15th, and the price is 950 euros plus VAT as applicable, depending on your location and on your fiscal status. So I hope that this video was helpful and of interest, and hope to meet you soon.